10 minutes or so.
Okay, thanks. Hi, everyone. I see a couple of familiar names and hear a couple of familiar voices. For those of you that I haven't met yet, my name is Manu Sporny. I am very heavily involved in standardization activities at the World Wide Web Consortium, the Internet Engineering Task Force, the IETF, and various other fora around the Internet. My background is as a technologist. Currently, I'm focusing quite a bit on standardizing payments on the web, and a portion of that is standardizing digital credentials, verifiable claims, things like that on the web. Eric Korb of Accreditrust pointed me at the Credential Transparency Initiative and the work that you're doing here. Primarily the work that Stuart Sutton has been doing on the kind of the expression language, the JSON-LD linked data model that CTI is currently looking at. And primarily, Eric pointed out that there's an enormous amount of overlap with what CTI is doing, positive overlap, like complementary overlap with what CTI is doing and what we're trying to get done at the World Wide Web Consortium. So I'd like to spend a little bit of time kind of giving a quick introduction to the group on what the World Wide Web Consortium is trying to do, trying to get off the ground, and then field any questions folks might have. So let's go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and put a link in the chat channel. Let me see if I can find how to do this. So there's work going on at the World Wide Web Consortium on verifiable claims. So the idea here is that we want to be able to express claims like which school you went to, what classes you've taken, whether or not you have a digital driver's license, digital passport. We want to be able to make those claims in a way that's interoperable at web scale and that is instantly verifiable, meaning there's a digital signature on it and anyone that gets the data, the credential itself, can check the digital signature and know that it's coming from who you think the credential is coming from. So at a high level, many of you have participated in the work that's been going on over the past year and a half, 2 years at W3C and the Credentials Community Group. That has resulted in an official task force being launched at the World Wide Web Consortium to explore exactly the problem that we're trying to, explore the problem statement and then see why solutions that are out there already, like, for example, LDAP and SAML and OAuth2 and OpenID Connect, why those solutions are not being applied to this problem successfully, right? So that means we're going out and interviewing experts like people that have worked on OpenID Connect and OAuth, and we're getting their ideas on why they think SAML may not be the perfect fit for what we're trying to do. And ultimately what we're doing is we're searching for a very narrow scope of something we can get a standardization activity started up around. Now, clearly the Credentials Community Group at the Worldwide, at W3C has a technical vision for the future, and CTI seems to be kind of building off of that technical vision to a certain degree. I want to be very clear that this is all still very experimental stuff, but we do have pilot programs that we're launching with universities and healthcare and finance. So it's not, this isn't entirely pie in the sky stuff. It's, it has real technical implementations, real technology behind it, and we're engaging some of the world's experts to work on this stuff. Let me stop there and see if there are any questions on what we're doing, or if anyone's confused about the overlap between CTI and the Credentials work going on at W3C. Any questions so far?
Yeah, this is Steve Midgley. So just trying to understand a little bit of the crossover. It looks like the link you shared is a verifiable claims link, which is essentially a bearer credential, meaning I got this degree from Harvard, or I got this certification from the Welders Institute, which feels more badge-like, which is very closely related, but there is this other problem that we're dealing with, which is the availability of essentially what do you call it, a directory or something else of the possible credentials that are obtainable, which could be turned into a verifiable assertion. And we're working a lot on that side of the problem. It's not that we're not interested in the other. I think obviously there needs to be an intersect. But are you also working on the directory makes it sound like it's just a lookup problem, but I mean the elements that sit in various directories about what's possible to obtain.
So we are to answer your question directly, we are not working on that, and that's why I think there's a lot of, it would be great to kind of harmonize the work that CTI is doing with the work that hopefully will get started at W3C, because, you know, we are saying we can make verifiable claims, but we don't have that directory to make the verifiable claims on top. There's no standardized, you know, effectively directory of the types of credentials you can issue and what those credentials mean, right? So we're working, so if the CTI is successful in establishing that directory, then the first, you know, some of the first consumers of that directory are the ones that are going to want to start issuing these credentials. The technical organizations that are working to issue these verifiable claims will have a really fantastic body of work to build off of that CTI has done. Does that help make the overlap, or at least the complementary nature of this a bit more clear, Steve?
Yeah, oh no, that's great. That sounds like a very viable intersection. That the hard part on the web is what you're doing. The hard part in the industry is what we're doing, meaning getting these claims to be asserted, meaning there exists a credential that you can obtain is actually, you know, as you can tell from all the different people working here, that's a very challenging thing to get up and running. Knowing that then those can be converted to actual attestations or whatever you want to call them is, harmonization sounds exactly right to me.
Yeah, so Manu, this is Robbie Robson. And just following up on Steve's question, because I'm not sure I understood the answer, because there's there are claims that are asserted by an individual as I can do something, and then there are claims that are associated that are issued by a third party or institution that says that a particular individual can do something. Are you looking at both of those and everything in between, or are you focusing on just the first?
We're focused on the second one primarily. So we don't see a great deal of value in someone saying, I am a licensed doctor, trust me, right? But we see a lot of value in a medical board issuing a credential that says, you know, this person is a licensed, Sorry, I don't know if my audio cut out there. Did that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. The question is whether or not the inserter into the web is the institution, or whether an individual has the equivalent of something that they own that is still nonetheless verifiable.
There are a couple of ways I can answer that, and I don't know if I'd actually end up answering your question. Let's take an ecosystem view of this. So the assumption that the technical work is taking is that there exists a set of issuers, you know, whether they're universities or community colleges or medical boards, and and someone is going to walk into that institution and say, and pass a test or prove that they're capable of something, and the issuer is going to issue a digital credential to that person. And then that person is going to take that digital credential and store it wherever they want to, right? It's going to go with them, and they're going to hold on to it. And when they get to some other institution that wants them to prove where they went to school, they're going to take that digital assertion and hand it over. And the consuming institution is not going to trust them. They're going to trust the issuing institution, the digital signature on the data that they handed over. Does that answer your question?
Yes, so that's very much like badges and parchment and that sort of end.
Yeah, except this is meant to be an international standard. The way that you express this data and sign it, it should work the exact same in any country, that's using the web and internet to transfer these claims.
Okay, thanks so much.
Any other questions? So Steve Mitchell has asked a number of questions in the chat. Steve, would you want me to respond to those, or did you get the answers to those questions?
I mean, you're welcome to tackle them as well. They were mostly asking other people on the call if my original question was sort of framing the issue right. It sounds like most people think that it is. I'm very curious what you guys are doing vis-a-vis the verifiable claims, just technically. I don't know if that's already available or if that's not even been discussed yet, because one of the things we've been doing is making claims. So when we want the goal has been for a while transportable credentials, not and we're going to have to come up with vocabulary to keep us from using the same word to talk about two different things, but I am able to, I'm a standards body and I set a credential. I'm a organization, I'm able to give that credential, right? And then those are all things that we're interested in. And then there's, I'm an organization and someone has earned a credential from me and I want to bind it between those two parties.
Right.
But in all of those cases, and the latter one is more you, and the first two are more us, I think.
Yep.
We have to make some sort of ideally transportable assertion, which involves some kind of cryptography and public key rings or some stuff like that. So where we head down that road, we have no desire, I don't think, to bake anything. We want to just pull out things that are already being done for that stuff, right, from the community.
So we're working on the core technologies to enable you to do that. So you could reuse a number of the technologies that the group is working on to do that. Again, let me be very clear that the standardization work has not started yet. We're right before that step. So the step we're at is to propose an official World Wide Web Consortium charter to work on these technologies. We already have the technologies, again, in pilot, so they're written, but to standardize it, we have to get, we have to put the charter in front of 400 members at World Wide Web Consortium, and they have to approve the charter, and then the technical work begins, and then there's 2 years, and then finally ratify the charter, and it goes out as an international web standard. So the step we're at right now, so we have technology that could be applied to the problems you just outlined. It is not an official standard yet, but you can start playing around with it. And I think Jeannie and her team have started playing, and Stuart Sutton have used some of those technologies there. Nate Otto, who I also see on the call, is deeply involved in this stuff and knows about what technologies exist and whatnot. So once that work begins and the standard's ratified, then I could say very clearly that you will have a set of technologies that allow you to do just what you said. Did that make sense?
So it gets me close. Maybe Otto or you, or Nate Otto, or you would, I'm looking for some top-line guidance in terms of architectural navigation. So one of the things that we're dealing with as a goal, aspirational goal, I think it's attainable, is transportable credentials, meaning the credential is not valid because it sits at a particular URL. The credential is valid because it, as a freestanding data structure, can be verified. So in that sense, it's a verifiable claim. Up to now, the precursor work, which Learning Registry, which we've talked about in the past, Manu, just I think once, but has been using PGP for signing, and it's somewhat unpleasant for a variety of reasons, but it works, right? And it's got an international key ring, and it's a solved problem. But people hate using it because it's incredibly technically obtuse to make it work. So I've been sort of toying around with JWT, and I haven't Java Web Tokens, and I don't know of other transportable, verifiable claim objects, PGP and JWT. As I look at OpenID Connect, and of course SAML and these other things, they are all on the, as far as I can tell, they're all on the wire claims verifications, not transportable, data at rest verifications. So do you have any, I don't want to dig too deep into this stuff, because I'm sure we have lots of other business, but giving us strategic advice at the architectural level so that we don't head down a road and we're like, oh, well, you're never going to weld that.
Right. So a couple of high-level thoughts, and what I'm going to say is controversial, so I don't want to make it seem as if there's a clear decision on this. The folks that have been working on the Credential CG have done a very deep dive on JWT and Jose. And we've done a very deep dive on linked data and how you get the best stuff to work together. We're also working with people like Christopher Allen. Christopher Allen is the co-author and co-creator of SSL and TLS. So we're not a bunch of amateurs working on this stuff. We're quite literally working with the best folks in the world. Like, Christopher Allen is the guy that he's the guy that invented the padlock icon, right? He's the guy that helped write the specs to secure all of the web traffic that we do, on the internet today. So he and a number of others agree that Jose and JWT is not the best fit for this technology. You can use it. Absolutely, you can use it. It ends up being kind of awkward, like using the PGP stuff on there. So what we've done is we've kind of gone back to the drawing board. We have a set of technologies, digital signature technologies, that live very nicely with the data, the linked data that expresses these credentials and these verifiable claims. And so we've designed this, this whole ecosystem that works very well together. What we're trying to do now is gain consensus around that set of technologies. And what might happen is that there is so much of an allergic reaction from the people that have already deployed OpenID Connect that we may not be able to get that work through the standardization process. Largely, it's a political game at this point. I hate to say that, but it's not. It's not. The technology's already done. Now the question is, can you get past all the standardization politics to get this, in my opinion, better solution through? So I would say, hedge your bets. JWT is one way of solving the problem, so you could definitely use that. We have something called linked data signatures. You might also want to take a look at that, and I think Nate's taken a pretty deep dive into that stuff as well. But those are really the two digital signature technologies that you could use to assert that your credentials are authentic, transportable and authentic. Did that help?
And yeah, that's right. And this other problem is verifying the signature from private key, or the publicly exposed part of the key owner, right? So PGP has these key rings, and other people can host them on their websites or whatever. But are you that side of the world? My experience so far has been a lot of people say, oh yeah, and then just go put your key someplace.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's actually a hard problem.
Yeah.
Also, are you guys addressing that in the linked data signatures world?
Yeah, we are. So there's a set of stuff that we're working on. Go ahead. Yep.
Stephen, Manu. This is a great conversation. It's something that we may want to explore a little bit further. And actually, Steve's kind of getting into his later topic anyway of some of the upgrades he's doing for the Learning Registry. So I don't know if you want to have another short session in another meeting, or
let's take it offline. That's fine. Thanks. I think I got what I needed out of this. Linked data signatures is your current model that you're trying to socialize, if we can say that, into the verifiable claims.
Correct. If it fails, we may back
linked data signatures is the tech that we should look at, and Nate Otto can drive us on that stuff. Right. So, but JWT and Jose and linked data signatures are the two things we should be looking at. That's I think a great takeaway.
Okay, that's a great conversation. This is Mike Parsons. So I'm going to have just a quick summary of what's been going on with the Credential Registry design, and then Steve will give us a brief update of what he's been doing, his challenges, the rationale for the changing for the back-end data store, and as already discussed, he's obviously looking into a different approach for the signatures. So as I think most people on the call know, the Credential Registry is going to be based upon the existing infrastructure provided by the Learning Registry. There's a link here to their website with your about to get more information if you're interested. And I start with another caveat that the basic information in here is the same, although there's a project underway being led by Steve to change the back-end data store from CouchDB to a relational database, which would probably enable more advanced APIs, but should not greatly affect the existing APIs. So the hope is that it's very much a black box change. So the concept is a credential document. Again, this may change as it goes to relational data store, but still the transport mechanism will be in a JSON document format. So you have properties and you have attributes. And so the actual storage of the document is a very competent object that has properties, concrete things like name, description, and so on, as well as relationships. So there's a lot of relationships we'll see between organizations and credentials, from the credential organization, QA, endorses, recommends, things like that. So this just illustrates, and the part in the center, we have a kind of relationship, credential owned by a particular organization or endorsed by a particular organization. So that way, when a person consumes this credential, they'll see a lot more information about relationships, not just the simple attributes of a credential. And just another caveat, there's links in here to the document for the credential and organization design, but there's no attempt right now to keep up with the changes in the domain model. It's kind of representative of what it will be, but you wouldn't find it's one-to-one equal to what's going on with the updates in the domain model that Sutton is leading. So another thing that we talked about too is that an organization and a person can function very similar, because a person can also endorse or be a credentialing person. So they will be very similar, and it's an agent is kind of a generic way of referring to both. And Stuart possibly could speak to that as well. It's not something that's officially, I think, endorsed by schema.org, but it's very convenient for us to be able to refer to agent, have an agent refer to the organization or person. But that's, again, that's kind of like in early stages. We're not sure how that will surface at the end. So the key thing we're talking about is the relationship. So that A credential will have a lot of relationships. There's going to be internal things. There's people who've looked at the domain model, see there's a lot of different profiles, transfer value, learning value, industry value, very many different kind of profiles. And a lot of those should be able to be stored within the credential itself. So just be objects related to the credential. They don't necessarily have to be separate entities. Again, with the change to a relational database structure, this may or may not change. But as far as an API is what you see coming out of it, you'll see these things contained within a credential document. Sample JSON you probably can't see too well, but just gives you an example of
before Steve, are there any other? Yeah, no, this was Stuart. I was just wondering whether there were any questions before we went on.
How it's
as I've sort of been thinking about this, and other people, again, chime in here on list or elsewhere, that the best place to go if you want to have a public piece of data last for a long time on the web is archive.org. So my theory is, rather than futzing with synchronization systems online, since we're talking about publicly accessible data, the idea is there will be APIs, there will be a living architecture that you interact with, and there will also be a copy in the form of some kind of collection on archive.org. So if anyone else wants to boot up their own copy, reuse it for different purposes, or just the network goes away in 30 years and someone wonders where all that stuff went, the only thing on the web that I'm confident about right now being around in 30 years and doing what it's doing is archive.org. So yeah, so that's just some of the design changes that I've been looking at. The big one for APIs relates to this question of relationships and understanding how data needs to get pulled back out of the system vis-a-vis content in the payload, so the credential content itself. In terms of dealing with things in the envelope, we already handle all that stuff. So that's, roughly speaking, the main items here: freestanding envelopes, signed assertions, persistence being handled through archive.org, and then these questions I have about APIs that I need to get answered with the team.
Okay.
All right, so those are
Steve, Manu
imperfect, lots of questions. Yeah.
Manu?
Sure. So, Steve, have you? So this is certainly something that comes up quite a bit in the web payments work and even the credentials work, which is you have a piece of information that you kind of want to publish out there. You want people to know that it's coming from you, right? And you may go away.
Yeah.
Right. So the way that we've got a couple of approaches to this problem right now. So to give you an idea, in the payments world, a retailer wants to put an offer of sale out there onto the web, and they don't really care where it goes or where it gets copied as long as the customer comes back to them, right? At some point. That's the reason they want this stuff to circulate freely. The incentives in the education space are a bit different, but it's the same kind of thing. You want to put this credential out there. You want it to kind of circulate freely. You want them to go back to the source of truth at some point, but sometimes that source of truth might go away. Like a community college might go out of business, and the credentials that they were giving out are just they're not there yet. But you still have this thing, free-floating thing that can go out there. So archive.org is a perfectly reasonable way to go about it. Carrie earlier in the call mentioned that blockchain, people are starting to look at blockchain. There's a ledger project at W3C. There are actually two of these. So there's one called WebDHT. It's a decentralized hash table for the web. You can store data in there so that this network, this storage network, will continue to live on after the issuing organization goes away. The people that created the credential goes away. So there's blockchain-like technology that we're looking at. One of them is WebDHT. The other one is a generalized ledger. So the idea that it's kind of like the Bitcoin blockchain, but the idea here is that you can store anything in this ledger, and it could be that all the education organizations get together and decide that they're going to, as a community of educators, run an infrastructure that allows you to publish these credentials and update them over time, such that if no one has to pay for the high availability infrastructure by themselves, everyone kind of gets to pay for it. Does that make sense?
It does, exactly. So this will just be reflective comment in some ways based on some of the work we've been doing. My concern about the generalized ledger tech, blockchains and otherwise, is that they are still speculative endeavors, meaning I don't have a lot of worry that in 20 years Bitcoin will have withered away. There's some worry, and in fact I'd be more worried about Bitcoin having not enough peers left in the network to process the blockchain in 20 years than I'm worried about archive.org being gone in 20 years. So I still have this concern that if you make your persistence bet on a peer-to-peer network, you are relying on the network of peers to remain active. So that's the core of my design architecture problem. I would like to build these envelopes so that someone wants to inject them into a distributed network, computable network like a blockchain or otherwise, BitTorrent, whatever, that they're compatible with that. But as an initial design project, my primary concern is to say, what's the safest bet I can make to say, where should we put this stuff so that if anyone wants to go to the source of truth, it'll be there now, and it'll be there, and they can depend on it being there for, as my theory is, as long as any other. There's no better bet, meaning what's the place to put it that's the best bet? And then let's try to engineer it so that if there are other bets people want to make because they have compelling capabilities, let's try to make ourselves compatible with those things. So what do you think about that viewpoint?
Everyone overwhelmed?
Or anyone else?
Too broad?
Sorry, I muted myself. I think that what you mentioned was perfectly rational. That's a perfectly rational way to go about it. You want to solve the problem in the short term, thinking about how it scales to the long term. So pick someone that publishes data that's going to be around for 10 years, right? Archive.org seems like a perfectly reasonable one. Internet Archive, Library of Congress. There are a bunch of these, out there, and you just need to decide and pick one. I don't think that there's anything, and then as long as you design the envelope properly, at some point you'll say, okay, we've been storing this on archive.org, but now there is a set of institutions that want to run a permissioned, generalized ledger, and we're going to upload these credentials to that now. And so that, they're going to live there, and they may also live at archive.org at the same time while we make the transition. And I think that's how you future-proof this stuff. If you look out 25 years, for the next 10 years, you want to publish in archive.org or something like that, and you know that the generalized ledger stuff is coming down the pipeline. So plan for it.
That's right.
And I don't think you're doing anything that prevents that from happening.
Hey, this is Carla. I have a question.
Great. So,
both you and Steve, and that has to do with the generalized ledger. Is there anything about the current envelope design that that the generalized ledger that Manu is working on, it can be embedded in archive.org, or are those essentially two separate tracks?
I have not seen the data. So I'm sorry, I'm very unfamiliar with the data structures you're working with, but the slide deck that we just looked at, that data structure would plug right in, no problem. So, and honestly, like any piece of data, if it's a generalized ledger, it should be able to store, the thing expressed as XML or binary or JSON or JSON-LD or whatever envelope format you have. So I don't think you should be that concerned about it.
Steve, this is Ravi. So one of the nice things about blockchains is they do automatic sort of configuration management, history, and versioning. Does the envelope? I can't remember. Does the LR envelope have that as well?
So the LR envelope doesn't speak to the transport. So we tried, whether it be API, storage, or wire or whatever. So we tried to decouple our statements and the containing sort of elements of who made the statement or when was the statement made, the envelope level stuff. So you think of it like SFTP and a PowerPoint attachment or whatever. So there's this information at the top, the headers about like who sent it, what was the subject, blah, blah, blah. And then there's this payload of attachments, which can be whatever you want. So the main configuration issue that happens is as you're processing envelopes, you're like, what the hell is in the payload? And so we have mechanisms in the envelope, like MIME types, although they would get more detailed than that, to clue you in as to when I pop open this UDF-8 string in the payload, what am I going to find? So what parser should I put on it? That kind of stuff. That configuration management is handled in the envelope. But
okay, so
the
my question
larger
was
question of what API or you know, go ahead.
Yeah, my
so
question
versioning is,
that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so versioning is something, and Jim Clough I see is on the call, so hi Jim. Jim knows more about this than anyone else. You wrote it, but I did participate in that design. So currently versioning, and this is something that I'm still thinking about, but versioning does have a handled problem, is a handled case where you can say, you can publish an envelope whose purpose is to say, if you encounter another envelope of this particular identity, I am making a claim that that envelope is deleted. It no longer exists. So if you find both envelopes, you're able to configure yourself so that the original envelope is suppressed. Or conversely, an update is just a delete with a new piece of data. So that is deleted and this is replaced. And that is all handled through signing. So you have to retain the old signature of the old envelopes in order to re-sign it. We also have a sort of a conventional back.
Steve, we lost you?
Yeah, we lost you, Steve. You cut out. Jim, are you there? You can maybe finish.
I can kind of think I can kind of continue on that. I think I know where Steve was going. Let's see. He was talking. There is a conventional whitelisting. So as far as if the key is lost, there's a conventional way to publish a global master key or that can sign a replacement document in the system, which can then supersede any other document.
This is Mike Parsons. I think I'd like to jump in on this. Another great conversation, but we have to move on to the next topic.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Am I back?
Yeah.
Okay. So I heard enough to know we're going to punt for later, but hopefully everyone heard enough at least to know roughly where we're headed. I'm happy to engage with anyone who wants to talk about this stuff clearly. And the main takeaway I'd like to just add before we switch to the next topic is this question of relationships between entities in the CTI spec and what the expectations are around the APIs that deal with those entities. So find me everything owned by this institution. Find me everything that is a parent
Well, basically, I could start talking. What to do is basically bring you up to date on where we are in terms of the domain model and the definitions, and we're here at the verge of the competency framework stuff, and got a little bit there from Mike, and I'll go into that maybe in a little more depth. So, can you see my screen? Well, of course, you can't see the main slide. Okay, the domain model that you're looking at right now is not the one that was in front of you in terms of the materials for today. There's been some discussions in the last few days around doing some refactoring of some parts of the model, and this represents that refactoring. And so we have a meeting coming up this next Tuesday, our regular weekly meeting, where we'll talk about some of the pieces of this that have changed, and then we'll get this out to you and start updating the tables and so forth for the properties and classes. So there are major classes. The principal one is the Credential, there in the middle in orange, and agents, organizations, persons, and persons and organizations, and then a whole set of properties. I do want to say something about the scale. This project is large in terms of its data and the data modeling. In some ways, I think it's as large probably as good relations, the e-commerce stuff. It's quite large. So the place where we have been doing considerable work in the last week or two has been around the properties, and particularly the ones in the circle there, which are the properties that relate an agent to a credential. And that, as Mike alluded to earlier, is in the implementation discussions, is relatively complex. In addition to those two key classes, the agents and the credential itself, there are a range of profiles, and those profiles play a critical role in being able to cast greater light into the nature credential being described. So the large vertical orange box on the left, most of those profiles, and the profiles extend and expand on basic attributes of the credential itself. And you'll notice this one up in the upper right, which is an entity that helps us expand on the relationships between the sort of a reification of the relationships between the organization and the credential itself. So these profiles are numerous, and I'll talk about them in a moment. The model also and the data will reference many external resources, external courses and courses of study, courses, and there's currently work going on over in the schema course working group over in W3C around the description of courses and course and programs of study, courses of study, if you will, referencing external competency frameworks and referencing a raft of external vocabularies, both government and organizational vocabularies around profession and occupation. So we've got ONET and SIC and SOC and a whole range of external resources that many of these entities within the model reference. The profiles, as I said, expand on the aspects of the credentials. And there are, as we saw, a number of them. The reason for the multiplicity is that some of these aspects will advance at different rates than others. They may vary by region, by time frame. For example, the cost of attainment of a credential may vary by region and clearly would vary over time. Employment outcomes, so forth, vary by region and over time. So each of those profiles make it possible to take that aspect, authentication, assessment cost, process, quality assurance, etc., and to describe them discretely, and sometimes one to n if there are multiples around things like cost and course. So the profiles have been a challenge, and I still think we are close at this point to being able to say that we have the right ones. This listing that you see here are the right ones, and that we still have a little refinement to do in terms of our individual properties, but we're feeling fairly comfortable about that. The next piece will be then doing a better alignment, going through the properties that we have asserted that we need, or at least the attributes that we need to describe, and then seeing where that mesh is between what we're doing and things like creative work and organization and the properties that are in SME.org, so we can do whatever aligning we need to do there. Down the road, we are going to have to do, to the extent that we want the vocabulary to serve as a schema.org vocabulary for credentials, we will have to become very judicious in terms of I think in the some of the early presentations, we call that the thin, the thin CTI, the thin descriptions that are useful in markup. That could be augmented from other terms in the vocabulary, but looking at the processes with schema.org, getting adoption, I think if we threw this whole model at schema.org, we would probably we would have, I don't know how successful we would be, and I think there are others here on the call who have those same kind of iterations fill over with courses and so forth. I mean, what is too much that it becomes overwhelming? Also, what is too complex that it becomes difficult to do? So the profiles. So we're pretty close to, I think, being able to say that with all of the interactions with stakeholders and so forth, that the schema says what it needs to say. Jeannie is in the process of interviewing stakeholders and walking through the data, and that enterprise of those interviews may reveal some additional changes and mentions, and they may prove some stuff to be, not necessary. But so it won't be totally stable for a bit, but hopefully fairly soon. So that leads us to the competency framework model, and Mike alluded earlier to the desire within the structure of the grant to have those two publication channels. One where the registry, the learning registry, serves as the mechanism for a transmission mechanism for the publication of credential data. Of course, the credential data will be in RDF, so ultimately there can be publication in other forms that are more directly connected to the web. But that publication process, the project is building an app to create those descriptions, and I'm sure that as soon as they as this all settles in, that there will be encouragement for others to develop apps as well, applications for the creation of these descriptions, of the credential descriptions. The second piece in the diagram that you saw just a bit ago was the creation of the description of competency descriptions of competency frameworks and their component competencies. And I think the initial goal was to have as a publishing mechanism, just like we had on the right side of that diagram, the learning registry, that the ASN D2L repository to be the place during the project, at least, where those where competencies could be published. So anyway, so that's the threshold where we are here. So the competency framework in the ASN D2L repository obviously is, ASN follows the ASN description language, which many of you are probably familiar with. So we're hoping that tools and tool sets that are developed to create and describe competencies and competency frameworks would be able to output in ASN as one of the established, probably well-established description languages. There are others, but it's one of them. So for those that maybe don't know much about the ASN model, it's been around since 2000. It was one of the earliest on the web sets of data using RDS. So it's been around since 1999, 2000, back a long time, and it is comprised basically of two entities: the what it calls the standards document, what we have come to call competency frameworks, and what it calls statements, and what we call competencies. So those are coextensive classes, as it notes over here. So it's in essence a two-entity model, or two primary entities. It's extensible, and the assumption here is that there would be a CTI profile that would extend to meet whatever needs, the descriptive needs we see emerging out of the CTI data, out of the competency frameworks in this space, in the certification space. There would be probably additional things there, and then additional things that the community thinks are appropriate, looking at how, for example, it can accommodate. I know that Robbie, who's done a lot of work in this area, looking at levels and how do you do those things? How are those expressed? So they're extensible. The current core model provides for standard document and its component competencies. In other words, links between those, relationships between standards documents, one standard document, another standard document, between statements in one and statements in another, and being RDF-based standards document and component statements are all identified with HTTP-based URIs to support universal web linking. That's the basics of it. It aligns, if you look at SEDS and their two-entity model as well. The ASN comports well with SEDS, and if I misstate, I can be corrected for sure. But it has a learning standards document, which would be equivalent to the standards document in the ASN framework, plus its array of elements are closely aligned as well. So this two-entity model, settling on this the standards document, and then SEDS goes on with the standard item, are fairly closely aligned. And since SIF, the School Interoperability Framework, uses SEDS as the basis for the modeling of competencies in SIF, there is a synergy there already. So that, along with its extensibility, will provide the mechanism for the early publishing, and so that they can start publishing out to the existing D2L repository, which is an open repository, of current open repository of standards, the largest repository of its kind that I know of in the world. It's pretty big. So that would give a publication pattern there. So returning to that model that Mike showed, we see the credential transparency language and the creation of apps in the creation of credential descriptions, their alignment to competencies, and then the publication of them, those descriptions that have been aligned to competencies to the learning registry. So that's kind of where we are. So we're at the threshold of extension with the ASN where necessary. The goal in the end, and others on the call from the CTI team can probably express this better than me, but the goal has not been to recreate as much as possible the credential description language to align with schema.org and the competency framework in this illustrated here with ASN to build on community standards that already have wide deployment. And both of those have wide deployment. And when we're done, both are in RDF. So that's kind of where we are. So why don't we open it up? I'm sure there are questions, comments, thoughts. Steve has a question about.
Yes. I've got a question. My mic's okay right now?
Yes. Yeah.
Great. So I think I understand the relationships here between the competencies, like say Common Core standards or something like that, and the credentials. But I get a little bit wobbly because I sometimes feel like competencies and credentials are comparable or even kind of the same entity. So this may be an appropriate time to sort of ask about in what ways can the competency repository handle these descriptions? Meaning it may not be a replication model, that's a whole different topic, but it might be a place where you get answers, API-driven, interactive answers about competencies, just like you would about credentials. Or
well,
should I say, you right now you can get answers about competencies in ASN using that model. Why couldn't you get answers about competencies in that system?
You mean in the learning registry?
In ASN. No, in ASN. So there's two goals in the credential registry. One is to provide a persistence and long-lived component so people feel good that their stuff is replicated and persisted, and I'm sure we can solve that problem no matter what the API engine is that serves the credentials. So I have a question, and you may say it's not designed for that, doesn't do that, but I have a question that does the ASN competencies repository, could it answer questions about, rather than just aligning competencies to credentials, isn't a credential a kind of competency, and couldn't you just put our credentials into the competency engine and answer all the questions people would want about them, or maybe not? So this may be a bigger conversation, maybe one you and me have to have offline. I don't want to.
I think. Oh, go ahead. Someone.
Yeah, this is Robbie. So Steve, in the stuff that we're doing, there's a separate notion of evidence. So I mean, there's the competency assertion that says that somebody has a competency, and then there's evidence and perhaps multiple evidence of those kinds of assertions. A credential is an odd thing because on one hand it is actually evidence of competency. So somebody has assessed it presumably on the back end and made an assertion. On the other hand, it also points to a competency and says which in some sense it asserts. So it kind of plays both roles. And so in our sort of view, the credentials really are part of evidence of competency. So when you retrieve a competency, you can go and ask, well, what evidence for this person is there of this for this particular individual, which then ties back to the credential.
So it's kind of I feel like there's three things going on, and so there's danger of confusion here just in language, which I'm sure Stuart and you have experienced many times over here. So one is an earned competency, meaning I am competent at a thing, which is a badge-like assertion or a transcript-like assertion. I don't think that we're talking about those things. I'm certainly not trying to bring that into the narrative right now. I'm talking about competencies as Common Core Standard 6.2.1 says a kid can know and do this. That is an unearned competency. It's just a freestanding statement of a possible competency that someone could have.
Correct.
I'm saying those sound a lot like credentials to me, but at a different scale or whatever, but go ahead.
Well, I think it's not only at a different scale. Well, it is at a different scale. If you think back a moment to the profiles and all of the other things that are necessary to do the kinds of comparative querying that people are hoping that this will be able to solve, but the credential in and of itself, the way it's playing out in this context, is an immensely rich beast. I mean, not only to link out to potential to link out to really the competencies, to the competencies on which it is based, but it can also, it can, if the context dictates, reach out to learning context and everything. Some credentials require a specific core study, given in a certain way and assessed in a certain way. But suddenly, we to not bound it somewhere, we begin to suck in competencies, we suck in courses, we suck in learning opportunities of kind. Now, relating to all of those, yes, I think descriptively, they are different. Another point with the competency frameworks is getting people to create these competency frameworks, every credential, to create to describe in a machine-readable way their competencies is a task. Some credentials will rely on competencies that are defined elsewhere by somebody else. Some will where they have their bespoke competencies that they address, but they have their own. And getting them to put these into machine-addressable form is no easy task. And there's some on the call that have been in that enterprise getting the promulgators of competency frameworks to actually describe them in a machine actionable way, and it will return data or human readable, HTML page. And it is not easy. And so once in separating this, another goal would be to make it simplify that process of generating, putting less cognitive load on generation of these competency frameworks as we can.
Okay, so meaning they'll become more flexible, more extensible. There are requirements in the credentials that aren't in the competencies. I get that, and I know other people have a question. The big thing I'm worried about, and we just should take this as a bookmark to talk about further later, I think, is that there are a lot of things people want to do with the credential registry besides just say, get me every credential that was published yesterday, or get me every credential owned by this entity, or get me every credential related to this topic. There's a bunch of interactions that people want out of the registry beyond that, and I don't understand what those are right now. And so insofar as those get to be sort of questions that are already being asked of a competency registry, that's where I wonder, do we solve the problem by just making the components of a credential that are a competency answerable via API from a competency repository that already exists? All right. I'll leave that for a future conversation. Other people have questions. Sorry.
Let's see.
We're getting near the end of the time, too, for people who have to drop off. This is a good subject to continue in the Google group, because certainly there's been a lot of questions raised.
Yeah, sorry, guys. it's on my mind because somebody is going to build a bunch of APIs in the credential registry, and I don't want to replicate something other people have already done. That just is not helpful. So. Anyway, Stuart, let's maybe reconnect, or Robbie, so we can reconnect and discuss them.
And in the chat window, there are some very interesting questions that are fleeting by. Pam has one around, and some of this, has to do with the recurring theme of mapping. Pam's real quick. What about the fact that competencies are described in different words that may be equivalent? I'm assuming that means that two competency assertions in two different spaces are basically the same, but they're expressed in different language. They're different, expressed differently, but are substantively the same. And I don't know whether that is a correct characterization, Pam. But this whole notion of being able to, on top of a competency frameworks that have been declared, to then be able to create distinct mappings that tie disparate things together. Texas map to the Common Core, different professional certification or competencies around a profession from two different societies, but the stuff is pretty close to the same. Anyway, yes. I hope. Do we save the chat window? Do we get this stuff? Because I've not really been looking at the chat window.
Yes, I will save the chat, and then it can be sent out in a summary later on.
Perfect. Good. Good. $9:30. At least in the Pacific Coast.
So I guess we've reached the end of our time. I'm quite happy to stay around if anyone has any more questions, but if not, then as Scarlett said, the summary will be sent out, and please use the Google group for continuing these conversations, asking questions, and posting issues and so on.
Will do.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Stuart, were you wanting to stay on afterwards to talk to Mike and Nate?
I was actually, I have to run. I'm sorry.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure before we ended the call.
No, unfortunately, I mean, I love a conversation, but no, I got to run. So.
Okay,
sounds
good.
Thank you all.
Thank you.